The clinical operation had become a documented crime scene. Their precision strikes had been recorded as evidence of war crimes. Their communications had been intercepted and preserved for prosecution. Their assumption of human primitiveness had blinded them to the possibility of legal sophistication. Mayor Duriakincade's calm voice echoed in the sudden quiet of the command center. She hadn't threatened them. She hadn't cursed them. She'd simply stated facts and laws. In that moment, her words proved more damaging than any weapon. The Ziraxi faced an enemy who fought with lawyers as effectively as with energy weapons. Weapons officers on the inevitable dominance watched their displays with mounting disbelief. Energy signatures flared across their screens that matched theoretical models from prohibited technology studies. Gravitic compression missiles rose from hidden silos that hadn't appeared on any scan. These weren't conventional weapons. They manipulated space-time itself, bypassing shield harmonics by altering the fabric of reality around their targets. The first missile struck a Ziraxi frigate. Its shields registered no impact, no energy transfer. The vessel simply compressed into a singularity the size of a combat helmet before vanishing. No explosion, no debris field, just perfect silent annihilation. Bridge crews reported the event with voices stripped of military professionalism. They sounded like witnesses to something impossible. Human fighters engaged Ziraxi interceptors with maneuvers that defied physics. Their craft pulled turns at velocities that should have crushed their pilots. Sensors showed no inertial stress on human pilots. Their compensation systems neutralized G-forces completely. Ziraxi pilots watched enemy craft change direction like thoughts rather than machines. Their own vessels struggled to maintain pursuit curves against opponents who seemed to rewrite the laws of motion. Electronic warfare reached new levels of sophistication. Human signals penetrated encrypted channels the Ziraxi had certified as unbreakable, command frequencies filled with ghost transmissions, false orders, fabricated status report. The humans didn't just jam communications. They replaced them with perfect replicas of Ziraxi command voice patterns and authentication codes. Weapons that existed only in theoretical journals became combat reality. Quantum entanglement communicators allowed human units to coordinate without signal delay across the entire battlefield. Phase shift armor made their vessels partially intangible during incoming fire. Energy dampeners converted offensive strikes into recharge cycles for their own systems. Each new technological reveal dismantled another Ziraxi assumption. Their shield technology, developed over centuries, became obsolete against weapons that didn't recognize energy barriers as obstacles. Their sensor systems, considered the most advanced in known space, failed to detect vessels using space-time distortion for concealment. Their communication protocols, designed by their finest cryptographers, became vulnerable to interception and manipulation. The technological gap became terrifyingly apparent. Humans weren't just matching Ziraxi capabilities. They were demonstrating systems that the galaxy's leading scientists had declared impossible. Their gravitic weapons required stabilization methods that theoretical physics deemed unstable. Their inertial dampeners solved energy distribution problems that had baffled Ziraxi engineers for generations. Commanders ordered tactical withdrawals that turned into disasters. Human vessels anticipated their movements with prescient accuracy. Escape vectors closed before they could be used. Rescue operations became ambushes. The technological superiority that had fueled Ziraxi expansion for centuries became their greatest liability. Their systems were predictable. Their methods were documented. Their capabilities were known quantities. The myth of Ziraxi technological supremacy collapsed completely. Their weapons looked primitive compared to human systems. Their vessels moved like Benzuo the Chenzhong Zhuangbei, compared to the fluid grace of human craft. Their strategies relied on overwhelming force against enemies who could make force irrelevant. They faced an adversary who had not only matched their technology, but had leaped beyond it into realms they couldn't comprehend. Senior officers began quietly accessing classified research databases. They searched for any project that might counter these systems. They found nothing but theoretical papers and failed prototypes. The humans had achieved in secret what entire Ziraxi research divisions had abandoned as impossible. Their technological arrogance had blinded them to the possibility that others might succeed where they had failed. The first anomaly appeared as a half-second delay in command acknowledgements. Officers noticed their confirmations echoing back slightly out of phase. Then entire transmissions began arriving before they were sent. The Zoraxi communication network, their greatest strategic advantage, had been compromised at levels they couldn't comprehend. Authenticated orders started contradicting each other across fleet channels. Battle Group 3 received instructions to hold position while simultaneously being ordered to advance. Vessels on patrol duty got recall notices that matched every security protocol. The confusion spread through the chain of command like a virus. Captains contacted command for verification, only to receive conflicting verification codes. Human operators transmitted perfect Zoraxi authentication sequences that shouldn't exist outside secured headquarters. They used command voices replicated down to individual speech patterns and respiratory pauses. A dreadnought captain received orders from what sounded like his direct superior, only to discover that officer had been unconscious in medical for 3 hours. The humans hadn't just broken their encryption. They'd stolen their voices. Surrender instructions began broadcasting across all frequencies. The messages used emergency channels reserved for catastrophic fleet events. They provided detailed coordinates for disarmament procedures and prisoner processing. The instructions were professionally formatted, perfectly composed, and used correct military terminology. Some junior officers initially complied, believing them to be legitimate orders from high command. The depth of their infiltration became terrifyingly apparent. Human operators demonstrated knowledge of fleet protocols that even veteran officers had to consult manuals to recall. They referenced obscure operational codes from decades-old training documents. They used command structures that had been modified just months earlier, proving their intelligence gathering was current and comprehensive. Command vessels tried to switch to backup communication systems. The humans had compromised those too. They'd penetrated systems that were supposed to be physically isolated from network access. Their quantum encryption breaking techniques made every channel vulnerable. The Zoraxi's entire communication infrastructure had been turned against them. Fleet formations began breaking down as contradictory orders created chaos. Destroyers assigned to protective screens suddenly maneuvered away from their charges. Supply ships altered course to non-existent rendezvous points. Fighter wings received coordinates that placed them on collision courses with friendly vessels. The precise military organization that had been their strength became their vulnerability. Attempts to go to communication silence failed. The humans broadcast false emergency signals that forced channels open. They simulated distress calls from vessels that weren't in danger. They created phantom threats that demanded response. Every attempt to regain control of communications only deepened the confusion. Command cohesion dissolved without a single shot being fired. Officers spent more time verifying orders than executing them. The fleet's reaction time slowed to dangerous levels. Opportunities for counterattacks were missed because confirmation procedures took too long. The humans had turned their greatest advantage, their disciplined command structure, into a liability. Senior commanders finally ordered a complete communication blackout. They resorted to messenger drones and line-of-sight laser links. Their advanced fleet had been reduced to pre-spaceflight communication methods. The technological edge they'd maintained for centuries had been nullified by an enemy who understood their systems better than they did. The communication warfare campaign achieved what energy weapons could not. It broke the Zoraxi command structure from within. It turned their precision into confusion, their discipline into doubt, their strength into weakness. The humans hadn't just defeated their technology. They defeated their entire military doctrine by using it against them. Lieutenant Moradin stood at attention before the council, his uniform perfectly pressed but his expression utterly defeated. The chamber felt different now. The polished obsidian table that had once projected invincibility now seemed like a monument to failed assumptions. He didn't request permission to speak. He simply opened the assessment file that would dismantle their entire understanding of galactic power dynamics. His voice carried none of the confidence that had characterized previous briefings. Human technological development followed a completely different evolutionary path than documented. While we measured civilizations by their orbital installations and surface infrastructure, they invested in subterranean and distributed systems. He brought up comparative schematics, showing Zoraxi cities stretching toward the sky, while human settlements plunged deep beneath the surface. The intelligence failure wasn't merely oversight. It was systemic blindness. Their scouts had reported exactly what they expected to see: primitive frontier structures, minimal energy output, limited transport capabilities. They either missed or deliberately ignored the evidence of advanced capabilities hidden in plain sight. Anomalous energy readings were dismissed as geological activity. Unusual communication patterns were logged as atmospheric interference. Every warning sign had been explained away. Moradin displayed intercepted human documents that showed deliberate deception strategies. They'd maintained a facade of technological inferiority while developing systems that surpassed Zeraxi capabilities. Their surface dwellings were designed to appear crude and temporary. Their visible technology matched intelligence expectations of a developing species. Meanwhile, kilometers below, they built research facilities that made Zeraxi's science labs look primitive. He suggested this wasn't unique to Proxima b. This appears to be standard human strategy when encountering potentially hostile species. They present a non-threatening appearance while developing countermeasures in secrecy. Their historical records show similar patterns going back centuries on their homeworld. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They'd encountered other human settlements. They'd made similar assessments. The implications settled over the chamber like poison gas. Their entire expansion model relied on accurate intelligence assessments. Their policy of swift, overwhelming force against primitive species assumed technological superiority. That assumption had just been proven catastrophically wrong. They hadn't just underestimated one settlement. They'd misjudged an entire species' strategic approach to first contact. Moradin delivered the final assessment without emotion. This isn't a tactical defeat. It's a systemic failure of our imperial model. Our intelligence-gathering methods are designed to confirm biases rather than discover truths. We see what we expect to see. The humans expected us to see primitiveness, so that's what we saw. Council members who had approved the strike sat in stunned silence. Their confidence in their institutions shattered completely. The military intelligence division they'd trusted for generations had failed them. The technological superiority they'd taken for granted had been an illusion. The galactic dominance they'd maintained through superior firepower had just met a species that understood deception better than they understood warfare. They realized they weren't fighting a settlement. They were fighting an entire philosophy of conflict that turned their strengths into vulnerabilities. The humans hadn't just developed better weapons, they'd developed better strategies. Their intelligence failure wasn't about missing data points. It was about failing to understand that some species measure power differently. Some civilizations build downward instead of upward. Some enemies hide their capabilities until the moment they choose to reveal them. The council dismissed Moradin without ceremony. They sat in the chamber long after he left, watching battle reports stream in from Proxima b. Each destroyed vessel, each failed countermeasure, each compromised system reinforced his assessment. Their empire had been built on a foundation of flawed intelligence. That foundation had just collapsed beneath them. They hadn't lost a battle. They'd lost the certainty that had driven their expansion for centuries. The human boarding teams didn't arrive through breached hulls or blasted airlocks. They emerged from maintenance conduits and service hatches that weren't on any security schematic. Their approach showed intimate knowledge of Zeraxi vessel architecture down to millimeter tolerances. They moved through the ships like architects walking through their own designs. On the dreadnought Eternal Supremacy, security teams reported intruders materializing on the bridge without triggering a single alarm. They used emergency escape passages that were supposed to be one-directional. They bypassed biometric scanners with replication tech that shouldn't exist. Their knowledge of ship layouts exceeded that of crew members who'd served aboard for years. They targeted engineering and command centers simultaneously. Bridge crews found themselves isolated from propulsion control. Engineering teams lost communication with weapon systems. The humans didn't destroy these sections. They captured them with surgical precision. Their boarding parties used non-lethal neural disruptors that left crews unconscious but unharmed. The absence of lethal force was more terrifying than outright destruction. It suggested planned repurposing rather than simple neutralization. Vessels that should have been impregnable fell within hours. The battle cruiser. Inevitable dominance resisted for 17 minutes after the first boarding alert. Its captain reported human engineers accessing main computers through service panels behind the command throne. They didn't bother fighting through security teams. They went around them through pathways only maintenance drones used. Human technical teams worked with disturbing efficiency. They interfaced with captured systems using adapters that fit Zeraxi ports perfectly. Their software integration happened faster than emergency wipe protocols could execute. Ships that had been Zeraxi property minutes before became human-controlled assets. Their own vessels turned against them with seamless transition. The capture protocol revealed meticulous planning. Humans had rehearsed these operations using stolen blueprints and intelligence. They knew every security measure, every failsafe, every emergency protocol. Their boarding teams moved with the confidence of crews familiar with the vessels they were taking. They didn't hesitate at junctions. They didn't consult maps. They knew these ships better than their builders. Crew members who resisted described facing opponents who anticipated their every move. Security teams set up defensive positions only to find humans emerging from ventilation shafts behind them. They tried to activate ship-wide lockdowns that the humans had already disabled through backup systems. Their defensive training proved useless against attackers who understood their procedures perfectly. The captured vessels didn't join the human fleet as trophies. They became operational immediately. Human engineers optimized systems the Zeraxi had considered peak efficiency. They removed safety limiters and performance restrictions. The same ships suddenly performed better under human control than they ever had under their original crews. Their potential had been limited by conservative Zeraxi engineering principles. Watching their own weapons turn against them created psychological devastation beyond military defeat. Crews saw sister ships firing on former allies with improved accuracy. They faced tactical maneuvers developed from their own training manuals, but executed with superior understanding. Their technology had been mastered by enemies who improved it within hours of capture. The military hardware that had fueled Zeraxi expansion became the foundation of human military growth. Each captured vessel provided not just additional firepower, but complete intelligence on Zeraxi technology and tactics. The humans didn't just take their ships. They took their strategic advantage and made it their own. Their imperial fleet became the instrument of their own defeat. The human fleet gained unexpected companions as it pushed towards Zeraxi core systems. Unidentified vessels slid into formation without hailing protocols or authentication requests. Their profiles matched species the Zeraxi had cataloged as technologically limited or thoroughly pacified. The Grithian ships moved like shadows, their sensor masking technology making entire battle groups disappear from scopes. They'd been considered a primitive aquatic species when the Zeraxi annexed their ocean world. Their true capabilities had remained hidden beneath the waves. Telax medical vessels joined the formation, their biological warfare countermeasures neutralizing Zeraxi bioweapons before deployment. The Zeraxi had considered them simple agricultural specialists. They'd missed the advanced bioengineering that allowed the Telax to manipulate pathogens at the molecular level. Their ships emitted resonance frequencies that dismantled viral structures and bacterial agents. Zeraxi bioweapon pods ruptured harmlessly in their launch tubes. Corial navigation ships took point through regions the Zeraxi had marked as unnavigable. Their gravity well mapping capabilities opened pathways through unstable nebulas and gravitational anomalies. The Zeraxi had classified them as non-spacefaring, after their single-system civilization offered no resistance. They hadn't understood that the Corial considered interstellar travel an art form, rather than an engineering challenge. Each species brought specialized capabilities that complemented human technology. The coalition formed not through conquest or subjugation, but through shared interest in dismantling Zeraxi domination. The humans provided the military framework while their allies filled strategic gaps. Together they created a complete military ecosystem that no single species could have assembled alone. The alliance demonstrated the fundamental flaw in Zeraxi expansion policy. They'd assessed each species individually based on visible military capabilities. They'd never considered that separate civilizations might combine their strengths against a common enemy. Their intelligence reports had evaluated threats in isolation rather than potential partnerships. Former subject worlds began declaring independence simultaneously. The Zeraxi Empire faced rebellion across hundreds of systems at once. Their fleet, designed for concentrated attacks on single targets, couldn't respond to widespread insurrection. Their military infrastructure relied on centralized control that was now compromised. The coalition forces moved with coordinated precision that surpassed anything the Zeraxi had encountered. Grithian sensor masking hid entire invasion fleets until they emerged from hyperspace. Telex medical ships protected Allied forces from biological attacks. Corial navigators found approaches that bypassed defensive networks. Human Tactical Command integrated these capabilities into a unified strategy. Ziraxi commanders watched their empire unravel from multiple directions. Core systems that had never known threat suddenly faced combined fleet actions. Supply lines that had operated for centuries were severed by coordinated strikes. Communications between sectors failed as rebel forces took control of relay stations. The alliance proved more effective than any single superpower. Each species compensated for the other's limitations. The humans provided strategic vision and military discipline. The Grithians offered stealth and infiltration capabilities. The Telax ensured biological security. The Corial enabled unprecedented mobility. Together they became something the Ziraxi had never planned for, a distributed, adaptable, and technologically diverse opposition. Their empire collapsed not from a single decisive blow, but from countless coordinated actions. Shipyards fell to sabotage. Mining operations ceased as workers rebelled. Agricultural worlds declared neutrality. The infrastructure that supported Ziraxi dominance dissolved within weeks. The hunters had become the hunted. The masters had become the besieged. Their subjects had become their judges. The transmission appeared simultaneously across every Ziraxi military and civilian channel. No authentication request. No security handshake. Admiral Daria Kincaid's face filled every screen. Her expression neutral, her voice calm and absolute. She wore a simple fleet uniform without decoration. Her eyes held no anger, no triumph, only the flat certainty of someone stating established facts. She began without introduction. Your orbital defense grid is under our control. 72% of your fleet has been destroyed or captured. Your capital's shield generators are offline. Planetary weapon systems have been disabled. Each statement landed like a hammer strike. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't emphasize points. She simply delivered the situation report. Her transmission included real-time evidence. Live feeds showed human vessels occupying Ziraxi defensive positions. Sensor displays confirmed fleet losses. Security camera footage captured their own command centers under human control. The proof was undeniable and comprehensive. She wasn't making claims. She was documenting reality. She outlined terms with the precision of a legal document. Complete demilitarization of all Ziraxi military assets. Dismantling of planetary weapons across their territory. Immediate independence for all conquered species. Political reorganization toward representative democracy. Each demand was specific and non-negotiable. She offered no alternatives because none existed. The military situation was irreversible. The admiral's voice never wavered. She didn't threaten consequences for non-compliance. She didn't need to. The evidence of their capability surrounded every word. Her transmission itself was the demonstration. Their complete penetration of Ziraxi communications proved their control. They weren't proposing terms. They were describing the new reality. Ziraxi leaders watched from secure bunkers that suddenly felt vulnerable. Their military advisors had no counterproposals. Their political strategists had no bargaining positions. The humans held every advantage. Their forces controlled the orbital space. Their allies blocked escape routes. Their technology dominated every system. The admiral concluded with finality. You have 6 hours to acknowledge these terms. Response channels have been provided. The transmission ended as abruptly as it began. Screens returned to normal operations, but nothing would ever be normal again. The era of Ziraxi supremacy had ended in an 18-minute broadcast. Command centers across the homeworld fell into stunned silence. Officers who had once commanded fleets now faced unconditional surrender. Politicians who had ruled an empire now confronted the loss of everything they'd built. Their military power had vanished. Their political control had evaporated. Their technological advantage had become irrelevant. Some commanders initially rejected the terms. They ordered remaining forces to resist. Those orders never reached their destinations. Human-controlled communication systems blocked them. Attempts to activate hidden weapon systems failed. Emergency protocols had been disabled. The Ziraxi had been disarmed before they knew they were disarmed. The admiral's calm voice echoed in the silence that followed. Her lack of emotion made the defeat more complete. She hadn't gloated. She hadn't threatened. She had simply stated facts and terms. Her confidence came from absolute control of the situation. The Ziraxi weren't being offered surrender. They were being informed of its necessity. Their empire had fallen not with a grand battle over their capital but through systematic dismantling of their capabilities. The humans had taken their weapons, their ships, their communications, and finally their choice. The ultimatum wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration of facts. The Ziraxi could accept those facts or be destroyed by them. Either way, their dominance was over. The occupation began with constitutional lawyers rather than shock troops. Human advisors arrived with data slates instead of weapons. Their first demand targeted the foundation of Ziraxi society, the elimination of birthright hierarchy. For millennia, social status had been determined by ancestry. Now every citizen would stand equal before new laws. The ancient caste system that structured their civilization would be dismantled piece by piece. Across the empire, conquered worlds received immediate independence declarations. Human protection guarantees followed each proclamation. Their fleets would defend these new nations against any attempt to re-establish Ziraxi control. The imperial structure that had taken centuries to build dissolved in weeks. Former subject species became sovereign states with human-backed security assurances. On the homeworld, the Planetary Council formation proved most revolutionary. For the first time, all castes received equal representation. Laborers sat beside former aristocrats. Service workers debated policy with scholars. The council chambers that had echoed with imperial decrees now hosted democratic deliberations. Human advisors observed from the galleries, offering guidance only when requested. The restructuring preserved what deserved preservation. Cultural institutions continued their work. Scientific academies maintained their research. Museums kept their collections. Only military and hierarchical structures faced dismantlement. The humans showed respect for Ziraxi achievements while rejecting their oppressive systems. Human teams worked with local leaders to design fair representation models. They studied Ziraxi history and social structures before proposing changes. Their recommendations reflected understanding of cultural nuances rather than imposed foreign values. They adapted democratic principles to fit Ziraxi contexts instead of demanding conformity to human models. The occupation focused on creating self-sustaining governance. Human advisors trained Ziraxi administrators in democratic processes. They established educational programs teaching civil service rather than obedience. Their goal was eventual complete withdrawal once stable systems operated independently. This wasn't colonization, it was rehabilitation. Ziraxi citizens experienced liberation through the loss of their imperial identity. Former rulers now answered to councils containing their former servants. Military leaders became civilian administrators. The societal transformation reached every level of daily life. The very systems they had tried to destroy became their foundation for rebuilding. Economic restructuring accompanied political changes. Resource allocation shifted from military production to civilian infrastructure. Manufacturing facilities that built warships now produced transportation systems. Research centers that developed weapons turned to environmental technologies. The economy began serving citizens rather than conquest. Cultural exchanges began unexpectedly. Human scholars studied Ziraxi art and literature with genuine interest. They preserved historical records that the former regime had suppressed. They helped establish libraries containing previously banned texts. The occupation became an exercise in cultural rediscovery rather than eradication. Legal systems underwent complete overhaul. Courts established equal justice principles. Former elites faced the same laws as common citizens. The judicial transparency shocked a society accustomed to privilege determining outcomes. For the first time, justice became predictable rather than preferential. The transformation proved more unsettling than outright oppression. Having their entire societal structure invalidated created psychological disorientation. Their imperial identity had defined their sense of worth. Now they had to build new identities as equal citizens in a galactic community. The humans offered freedom, but first they had to dismantle the mental chains of hierarchy. The humans arrived without weapons. Their peacekeeping forces brought engineering teams and medical units instead of combat troops. They deployed across the homeworld with infrastructure plans instead of occupation manuals. Their first actions targeted power systems that had served the elite while neglecting common districts. They installed clean energy grids that reached every neighborhood without regard for former caste designations. Water purification networks expanded to regions that had never known reliable access. The humans repaired distribution systems that the former regime had left decaying for generations. They didn't prioritize military installations or government compounds. They served the poorest sectors first. Their engineers worked alongside local crews, teaching maintenance protocols as they upgraded facilities. Transportation networks underwent complete overhaul. Mass transit systems replaced private military convoys. The humans built efficient rail networks connecting production centers to population zones. They opened transportation access to all citizens regardless of former social status. Mobility became a right rather than a privilege. Economic transformation followed infrastructure improvement. Job creation programs targeted historically disadvantaged districts first. Manufacturing facilities retooled from weapons production to civilian goods. The humans established credit systems that didn't require family connections or caste approval. Economic mobility became possible for the first time. Healthcare availability shifted from elite privilege to universal right. Human medical teams established clinics in regions that had never seen doctors. They trained local healthcare workers using simplified diagnostic tools. Infant mortality rates dropped dramatically within months. Life expectancy increased across all social levels. Educational reforms targeted fundamental change. Schools stopped teaching obedience to hierarchy. Critical thinking became the core curriculum. The humans introduced learning systems that encouraged questioning rather than memorization. They provided technology access to students from all backgrounds equally. Crime rates plummeted as economic opportunities expanded. Police forces transitioned from enforcing caste laws to protecting communities. The judicial system focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Social stability improved as basic needs were met consistently. The humans governed more effectively than the Zeraxi ever had. Their administration showed efficiency without corruption. Their decision-making process involved local representatives at every level. They demonstrated that governance could serve citizens rather than control them. Resistance movements found no traction. The population experienced measurable improvement in living standards. Former rebels became community leaders in the new system. The paradox of defeat through improvement became undeniable. Their society was transforming through benevolence rather than force. The occupation created prosperity that made rebellion pointless. Why fight to restore a system that had served only the elite? The humans had given citizens more freedom and security than their own government ever provided. The Zeraxi were being defeated by their own advancement. Infrastructure became the weapon of change. Reliable power created industry. Clean water created health. Education created opportunity. The humans understood that true control comes not from fear, but from meeting basic human needs. They built a society that worked better than the one they had dismantled. The transformation reached every aspect of daily life. Public spaces became safer. Cultural institutions became accessible. Economic mobility became real. The humans didn't need weapons to maintain control. They had given people reasons to support the new system voluntarily. Their occupation proved more permanent than any military victory could have been. They hadn't just conquered territory. They had won allegiance through demonstrably better governance. The Zeraxi experienced the ultimate defeat, realizing their conquerors were better rulers than their own leaders had ever been. The liaison assignment came without ceremony. A simple data slate notification. I reported to Human Administration Building 7, expecting interrogation or re-education. They gave me an office with a window overlooking the rebuilt Capitol. My title, Cultural Affairs Coordinator. My mission, explain my people to our conquerors. I started with social structures. The humans had charts showing Zeraxi caste systems and kinship networks. They asked questions about ceremonial practices I assumed they'd ban. Instead, they wanted to preserve traditions that didn't violate their principles. Their interest wasn't anthropological curiosity. It was practical governance. They needed to understand us to rule effectively. Education reform became our first project. Human educators brought democratic teaching methods. I showed them Zeraxi learning traditions that emphasized communal knowledge. We created hybrid curricula that respected our past while preparing students for their future. The humans never imposed. They adapted. Their flexibility surprised me more than their weapons ever had. My office became a crossroads. Human engineers consulted me on infrastructure projects affecting historical sites. Medical teams asked about traditional healing practices they might incorporate. Even their military commanders sought cultural context for security decisions. I witnessed genuine interest in preserving what made us unique, rather than erasing our identity. The art exchanges began unexpectedly. Human curators arrived with preservation equipment for Ziraxi masterpieces damaged during the conflict. They didn't just restore paintings and sculptures. They studied them, asked about techniques, inquired about artists. Their appreciation felt authentic, not performative. They saw a value in what they could have easily dismissed as primitive. Scientific collaboration followed. Human researchers examined Ziraxi energy distribution systems that used biological components. Our neural interface technology interested their medical specialists. They didn't confiscate these advancements. They proposed joint research initiatives. My people became partners in exploration rather than subjects of study. The liaison role transformed from diplomatic duty to genuine partnership. I helped design cultural exchange programs that brought human students to our universities. Our scientists visited their research facilities. The knowledge flow moved both directions. They learned from us as we learned from them. My perspective shifted gradually. I'd witnessed the entire conflict from initial bombardment to final surrender. I'd felt the humiliation of defeat. Now I observed the humans rebuilding what they could have destroyed. They showed respect for achievements their weapons had nearly erased. Their occupation demonstrated strength through preservation rather than eradication. The cultural liaison program expanded across former Ziraxi territory. Other species requested similar arrangements. Humans trained liaisons from dozens of civilizations. The role became a model for interspecies cooperation rather than occupation management. We weren't conquered subjects. We were founding members of a new galactic community. I stood at my office window watching human and Ziraxi engineers collaborate on the new power grid. Their easy cooperation seemed impossible months earlier. The humans had defeated our empire but saved our civilization. They'd broken our military but built our future. My duty shifted from explaining my people to helping build something neither species could have created alone. The liaison role became the bridge between past and future. We preserved what deserved preservation. We changed what needed changing. The humans hadn't just conquered us. They'd given us the tools to reinvent ourselves. My people would remember the defeat, but our children would inherit the partnership. One revolution around their star changed everything. The narrator stands on a balcony overlooking the capital, watching transport streams flow where military convoys once rolled. The air smells of ozone from the new power grid, not weapon residue. The Planetary Council building glows with lights from every window. Inside, representatives from species the Ziraxi once called inferior debate infrastructure budgets. A Grithian delegate argues passionately about water reclamation, while a Telax representative counters with environmental impact studies. Their voices carry equal weight. Their opinions matter equally. Infrastructure improvements raised living standards beyond pre-war levels. Power reliability reached 98% across all districts. Water purification systems eliminated diseases that plagued lower castes for generations. Transportation networks connected regions that had been isolated for centuries. The humans measured progress not by military capacity, but by quality of life indices. Their metrics showed improvement everywhere except weapons production facilities, which they had converted to civilian use. Scientific collaboration produced breakthroughs neither species could achieve alone. Ziraxi biological interface technology combined with human neural networks created medical systems that could regenerate damaged tissue. Their joint energy research developed clean fusion reactors using principles both cultures had considered theoretical. The shared laboratories became centers of innovation rather than secrecy. Knowledge flowed freely where restrictions once stifled progress. The humans haven't extracted resources or imposed cultural domination. Their occupation forces live in standard housing without special privileges. They pay for materials using established trade rates. They've enabled self-determination rather than creating dependency. The Ziraxi govern themselves under new constitutions they wrote with human guidance rather than human direction. Ziraxi citizens experience freedoms they never allowed their own subjects. Speech isn't restricted by caste protocols. Movement isn't limited by security zones. Employment isn't determined by birth status. The society that enforced strict hierarchy now operates on meritocratic principles. The change created confusion initially, Then liberation as people discovered capabilities they never knew they had. Their definition of strength shifts from military power to governance capability. The new Planetary Council measures success by economic growth, educational attainment, and public health metrics. Security discussions focus on disaster response rather than threat neutralization. The military budget funds environmental protection and space exploration. Their concept of power transformed from controlling others to improving lives. The narrator acknowledges this is liberation, not conquest. The humans didn't come to rule. They came to remove a threat and build something better. Their occupation follows withdrawal timelines rather than permanent garrison plans. They train local administrators to replace their advisors. They prepare to leave behind a functioning society rather than a controlled territory. Their empire needed to fall for their civilization to truly advance. The hierarchical system that created stability through oppression limited their potential. The military focus that drove expansion stifled other forms of progress. The humans didn't just defeat their military. They broke the mental chains that prevented their evolution as a species. The transformation reaches every aspect of society. Art flourishes without state direction. Science explores without military applications. Education teaches critical thinking rather than obedience. The Zuraxi discover that true strength comes from empowered citizens rather than controlled subjects. Their defeat became their awakening. The narrator watches a human engineer laugh with a Zuraxi technician as they troubleshoot a power converter. Their easy camaraderie symbolizes the change. The conquerors work alongside the conquered as partners. The occupied help the occupiers improve their systems. The line between victor and vanquished blurs until it disappears completely. Liberation looks like conquest until you see what grows from the ruins. The classroom walls displayed star maps that shifted with every question. A human teacher stood before young Zuraxi students, her hands tracing constellations that weren't in their traditional astronomy. She didn't mention the war. She didn't describe human victory. She pointed beyond known space to regions marked unexplored in soft red outlines. Her lesson focused on collaboration between species to face unknown challenges. She showed how Zuraxi sensory perception could complement human technology in deep space mapping. She explained how different biological systems might interact with anomalous energy fields. The students learned problem-solving rather than obedience, curiosity rather than dogma. The classroom technology surpassed anything the Zuraxi educational system had previously used. Holographic displays responded to student eye movements. Neural interfaces allowed direct information transfer without overload. Learning systems adapted to individual cognitive patterns rather than forcing standardized approaches. The humans had brought educational tools that made their former high academies seem primitive. Human educators demonstrated patience with varied learning styles. They accommodated Zuraxi pupils who learned through tactile engagement alongside those who preferred visual patterns. They adjusted teaching methods for students from different castes without showing preference. Their instruction emphasized understanding over memorization, application over repetition. The next generation will see humans as partners rather than conquerors. These children won't remember orbital bombardments or military defeat. They'll recall human teachers who stayed after lessons to explain complex concepts. They'll remember field trips to joint research facilities where Zuraxi and human scientists work together. Their formative experiences will involve collaboration rather than subjugation. The true conquest happens in minds, not through weapons. These students will grow up believing interspecies cooperation is normal. They'll consider shared exploration the natural purpose of spacefaring civilizations. Their concept of achievement will involve collective advancement rather than individual dominance. The classroom becomes the engine of cultural transformation. Their future shifts from domination to exploration. Lesson plans include joint missions to uncharted sectors. Students practice solving hypothetical first contact scenarios through diplomacy rather than force. They learn emergency response protocols that prioritize preservation of alien life forms. The curriculum prepares them for discovery rather than conquest. The teacher asks a question about nebula formation. A young Zuraxi raises her hand, then modifies her answer when a classmate offers additional data. They collaborate naturally across species lines. The human educator nods approval without highlighting the significance. To these children, such cooperation requires no special recognition. It's simply how learning works. The classroom's windows show construction crews building new research facilities where military installations once stood. The students watch spacecraft from multiple species docking at orbital stations. Their education occurs against a backdrop of genuine galactic community. The lessons on their screens match the reality outside. The human teacher concludes with a challenge problem involving gravitational anomalies. Student teams form without regard to species. They debate solutions using terminology from both Zoraxi and human scientific traditions. Their proposed answers blend approaches neither culture could have developed alone. The teacher watches with quiet satisfaction. The conquest is complete. The liberation has begun. Post-conflict analysis revealed the true depth of human strategic planning. Their primitive appearance wasn't accidental underdevelopment. It was deliberate deception maintained for decades. They built surface structures to match Zoraxi expectations of frontier settlements, while developing advanced technology underground. Every visible aspect of their settlement served the deception. Hidden observation posts monitored Zoraxi movements for generations. Human operatives studied fleet formations and tactical protocols. They analyzed communication systems and shield harmonics. Their intelligence gathering exceeded anything the Zoraxi anticipated, because it wasn't intrusive. It was passive, patient, and comprehensive. The underground cities represented engineering on a scale the Zoraxi never imagined. Their design specifically countered orbital bombardment tactics. Energy absorption systems channeled strike forces into storage networks. Structural materials dissipated impact energy rather than resisting it. The humans built fortresses disguised as vulnerable settlements. Weapons development focused on countering Zoraxi strengths. They created gravitic missiles that bypassed shield technology. They developed electronic warfare systems that exploited known encryption weaknesses. Their fighter craft used inertial compensation that negated the Zoraxi advantage in high-G maneuvers. Every human system targeted a specific Zoraxi capability. The entire settlement served as bait for a larger strategic objective. The humans didn't just want to survive the attack. They wanted to dismantle the Empire. Their planning extended beyond defensive measures to complete counteroffensive capabilities. They prepared to take the Zoraxi fleet, their technology, and their territory. Their patience exceeded Zoraxi imagination. While the Empire planned campaigns in terms of years, the humans planned in generations. They seeded the Proxima system with monitoring equipment decades before establishing the settlement. Their operatives embedded in Zoraxi space under various identities. The deception operation began before the Zoraxi knew humans existed. The resolution became clear in after-action reviews. The humans weren't defending against unexpected aggression. They were executing a long-prepared strategy. Their response followed contingency plans developed through years of observation and analysis. Every Zoraxi action triggered predetermined countermeasures. Their victory was inevitable from the moment the Zoraxi took the bait. The attack played directly into human planning assumptions. Their intelligence on Zoraxi tactics proved perfectly accurate. Their technological countermeasures worked exactly as designed. The Empire's confidence became their greatest vulnerability. The strategic deception extended beyond military preparations. Humans studied Zoraxi law to use it against them. They understood imperial psychology better than the Zoraxi understood themselves. Their entire approach leveraged the enemy's arrogance as a weapon. They knew the Zoraxi would see only what they expected to see. Post-war investigations revealed the scope of preparation. Human listening posts had mapped the entire Zoraxi communication network. Their engineers had reverse-engineered captured technology years before the conflict. They'd developed countermeasures for weapon systems the Zoraxi considered invincible. The settlement's destruction was always part of the plan. Surface structures were designed to be sacrificed. The real assets remained safe underground. The Zoraxi attack provided the justification for response under galactic law. It also gave humans combat data on Zoraxi systems under real conditions. The humans turned defense into offense through perfect preparation. They didn't just anticipate the attack. They encouraged it. They positioned their settlement as an irresistible target. They made their vulnerability appear obvious when it was actually calculated. Their strategic deception became the instrument of imperial collapse. The Zoraxi Empire's collapse sent seismic shifts through the galactic sector. Former subject species declared independence with human-backed security guarantees. Their transition from conquered territories to sovereign nations happened within months. The imperial structure that enforced stability through control vanished. In its place grew a network of independent states bound by mutual interest rather than submission. Trade routes reorganized around equitable exchange. Shipping lanes that once carried extracted resources now transported shared technology and cultural artifacts. Economic systems shifted from exploitation to collaboration. Species that provided rare minerals received advanced medical technology in return. Those offering agricultural expertise gained energy distribution systems. The galactic economy began serving development rather than domination. Scientific advancement accelerated without military restrictions. Research facilities that once operated in secrecy now shared findings openly. Joint teams tackled problems that had stalled for generations. Siraxi biologists worked with human geneticists to cure previously incurable diseases. Grithian material scientists collaborated with Telax chemists on environmental restoration projects. Knowledge flowed freely across former political boundaries. The human model of cooperative governance became the new standard. Planetary councils adopted representative systems with protections for minority species. Conflict resolution moved from military action to diplomatic negotiation. Security alliances formed through voluntary participation rather than imposed membership. The galactic community began operating through consensus rather than decree. Species that never interacted under the Empire now collaborated on exploration. Joint missions mapped previously inaccessible regions. Research vessels carried mixed crews studying cosmic phenomena. The shared pursuit of knowledge overcame ancient prejudices and suspicions. The galaxy became more interconnected as communication networks expanded beyond former imperial channels. Hierarchical structures gave way to networked cooperation. Decision-making distributed across multiple species, rather than concentrating in single governments. The military dominance that defined interstellar relations faded. Economic and scientific collaboration became the primary drivers of galactic affairs. Power shifted from control to contribution. Human intervention created stability through freedom rather than control. Their influence operated through example rather than enforcement. They demonstrated that security could come from mutual protection agreements rather than overwhelming force. Their village hadn't just survived an attack, it had redesigned galactic civilization's operating principles. The transformation reached every corner of known space. Former Imperial monitoring stations became scientific outposts. Military bases converted to trade hubs. Weapons manufacturing facilities retooled for civilian production. The galactic landscape changed from fortified to open, from restricted to accessible. The new galactic community faced challenges differently. Environmental crises prompted coordinated response efforts. Resource shortages led to shared conservation initiatives. Scientific puzzles became collective solving exercises. The instinct for domination gave way to patterns of cooperation. Human involvement decreased as the new system stabilized. They transitioned from active administrators to advisory roles. Their ships remained available for protection, but not for enforcement. Their influence persisted through the systems they helped create, rather than through continued control. The galaxy became less predictable, but more resilient. The loss of centralized power created temporary instability but long-term adaptability. Species learned to solve problems through collaboration rather than command. The constant threat of imperial intervention vanished. In its place grew the challenge and opportunity of self-determination. The human approach proved infectious. Their combination of strength and restraint, capability and humility, became the model for interstellar relations. Their village's defense evolved into a galactic transformation. The attack that was meant to erase them instead erased the old galactic order. What emerged from the fire of conflict was not another empire but a community of equals. The humans showed that real strength builds rather than breaks. Their village didn't just survive an attack, it rebuilt the attacker's civilization. They replaced oppression with opportunity, control with collaboration. What began as conquest became liberation through better governance. The empire fell, but its people rose. Sometimes freedom arrives disguised as defeat until you see the schools, the hospitals, the open councils. The humans offered a future the Ziraxi couldn't imagine themselves. Victory isn't always about domination. Sometimes it's about offering a better way, even to those who tried to destroy you. The Grand Marshal gave the order to erase a human settlement from orbit. They called it surgical, precise routine. They never imagined those underground shelters held more than refugees. When the first energy signatures flared from beneath the dust, Their clinical operation became a nightmare. This is what happens when arrogance meets preparation. In the Grand Military Council chamber, they studied the settlement through tactical displays that rendered living beings as heat signatures and structural assessments. Grand Marshal Kalara's voice echoed across the polished obsidian table as she invoked Galactic Charter Section 7, framing annihilation as legal necessity. Administrator Gilar presented reports showing minimal energy output, negligible defensive capabilities, all carefully curated to support a single narrative. They saw primitive dwellings and assumed primitive minds. Commander Tarian dismissed initial sensor anomalies with the observation that humans, in his experience, simply refused to acknowledge when they were beaten. The council nodded. To them, this was not genocide. It was pest control on an interstellar scale. Their meeting lasted 17 minutes. Every argument against the strike came from lower-ranking officers whose warnings were logged and ignored. One lieutenant noted unusual geothermal activity beneath the settlement. Another reported energy readings that didn't match any known human technology. These reports were marked as sensor error or atmospheric interference. The council had erased smarter species than this. Their confidence was a weapon they'd used for centuries. Kalara gave the order without rising from her chair. The command traveled through secure channels to the battlecruiser waiting in high orbit. On the display, Proxima B glowed softly. Blue oceans, green landmasses, one small settlement about to vanish beneath precise orbital targeting. The Zeraxi method was clean, efficient, and left no political complications. They prided themselves on avoiding messy ground conflicts whenever possible. What they didn't see were the deep-spectrum scans humans had running since the first Zeraxi probe entered the system. They missed the harmonic dampeners built into what looked like simple mining equipment. Their intelligence described underground shelters designed for 500 inhabitants. The real number was closer to 50,000, living in facilities that ran 3 kilometers deep. The council adjourned. Kalara returned to her quarters. Gilar filed the execution order in the permanent record. None of them considered that their clinical approach, their reliance on overwhelming force and minimal engagement, might be the very thing that doomed them. They assumed a species that lived in surface dwellings couldn't possibly understand orbital mechanics or energy dissipation. It was their last uncontested thought. The battlecruiser Inevitable Dominance settled into its prescribed orbit. Below, Proxima B turned in its slow rotation, its single settlement glowing like a tiny ember against the dark side of the planet. On the bridge, officers executed protocols developed over centuries of such operations. They called it a surgical strike. In reality, it was mass murder made into administrative routine. Targeting officers selected coordinates with practiced efficiency. Power generators first, communications arrays second, what passed for defensive installations third. Each selection received approval from 3 separate officers. Forms were filed in real time. The bureaucracy of annihilation proceeded without emotional investment. They'd done this to 17 species before. The humans would be number 18. Weapons officers fired the first salvo. Energy lances streaked through the atmosphere, striking exact coordinates. Thermal sensors showed the expected flare of superheated material. Bridge crews noted successful hits in their logs. Secondary explosions should have followed within seconds. Fuel stores igniting, power cores overloading, structures collapsing inward. Instead, the thermal signatures did something unusual. They dissipated downward. Energy readings didn't spike and fall. They sank into the ground like water into sand. The expected chain reaction of destruction never came. A junior sensor officer reported anomalous dissipation patterns. His supervisor told him to recalibrate and rerun the scans. The second volley targeted residential sectors. Plasma charges designed to vaporize buildings instead produced muted explosions that seemed to get swallowed by the ground. Structures that should have disintegrated instead absorbed the impacts, their materials behaving unlike any construction the Zeraxi had encountered. A weapons officer compared it to throwing stones into deep water. The surface rippled, but nothing broke. Precision became their enemy. Their weapons were too accurate, too focused on visible surface targets. They designed their entire bombardment doctrine around species that built upward, not downward. Every strike gave them perfect data on what wasn't happening. Their sensors recorded energy being channeled, redirected, and stored rather than released. Bridge commanders began requesting new targeting solutions. The computer systems had no protocols for subsurface energy dissipation. Their tactical databases contained nothing about defenses that worked by absorbing rather than deflecting. The clinical operation they'd perfected across multiple star systems was meeting something it couldn't categorize. Weapons officers reported diminishing returns with each successive volley. The settlement's surface showed damage, but the critical infrastructure remained functional. Life support readings didn't drop. Communications traffic continued, though now encrypted in patterns their systems couldn't break. Their perfect attack was proving perfectly inadequate. The invasion plan called for 12 minutes of orbital bombardment before ground forces deployed. At the 11-minute mark, the battlecruiser's captain ordered a pause. Something was wrong. The settlement wasn't dying. It was adapting. Their surgical strike had revealed its first critical flaw. It only worked against enemies who fought on their terms. On the bridge of the inevitable dominance, sensor operators watched their displays with growing unease. Energy from their orbital strikes wasn't dispersing as expected. Thermal readings showed heat sinking deep into the planet's crust rather than radiating outward. Geological surveys had shown solid bedrock beneath the settlement. Their pre-invasion scans showed nothing but stable continental plate. Assessment teams initially dismissed the anomalous readings. They blamed sensor distortion from the bombardment. They suggested geothermal venting or unusual mineral deposits. One junior analyst proposed they were seeing energy absorption systems. His superior told him to check his equipment calibration. Then patterns emerged. Thermal signatures began moving in coordinated ways that defied natural explanation. Heat flowed through subterranean channels with deliberate purpose. What appeared to be random energy dissipation resolved into clear distribution networks. The settlement's surface structures were just the visible tip of something much larger. Life sign readings told the real story. Initial estimates suggested 500 inhabitants based on surface dwellings. Revised scans now showed thousands of life forms deep underground. Their life support systems maintained perfect atmospheric conditions 3 kilometers below the surface. This wasn't emergency sheltering. This was permanent infrastructure. Energy spikes began occurring in coordinated sequences. Patterns matched communication protocols rather than disaster responses. The humans weren't just surviving the bombardment, they were communicating through it. Their energy systems were routing and storing the attack's power, rather than being overwhelmed by it. Zeraxi tactical officers finally understood their error. They weren't bombing a vulnerable settlement. They were attacking the armored roof of a fortress. The primitive village was a decoy. The real settlement existed in massive subterranean complexes that their scans had completely missed. Their intelligence failure became terrifyingly apparent. Every assumption about human technological development was wrong. These weren't primitive settlers barely surviving on a frontier world. They were an advanced civilization that had deliberately concealed their capabilities. The surface structures were camouflage for something far more sophisticated. Sensor operators now detected energy signatures that matched prohibited technology, gravitic stabilizers, quantum entanglement communicators, systems the Zeraxi believed were theoretical. The humans hadn't just hidden their population underground. They'd hidden their technological level behind a facade of primitivism. The bombardment continued, but its purpose had changed. Instead of eliminating a threat, it was providing the humans with energy. Their strikes were being captured, stored, and redirected. Every energy lance that struck the surface was making the defenders stronger. The clinical operation had become a feeding mechanism for their enemy. Bridge commanders ordered a complete bombardment halt. They needed to reassess. Their sensors had failed. Their intelligence had failed. Their entire understanding of the situation had been wrong from the beginning. They were no longer conducting a police action. They were at war with an enemy they didn't understand. Down on the surface, the human settlement appeared damaged but functional. Smoke rose from impact sites. Some structures had collapsed, but the energy networks beneath continued operating at full capacity. The Zeraxi had thrown their best weapons at what they thought was a vulnerable target. They'd just discovered that target was actually the barrel of a gun pointing back at them. The dropships descended through Proxima B's atmosphere. Their trajectories calculated for maximum security and minimal exposure. Command expected scattered small arms fire at worst. They received coordinated energy weapon strikes that matched their own tactical precision. Hidden ports opened across the settlement's surface, Not crude gun emplacements, not improvised launchers. Professional-grade plasma lances with targeting systems that ignored electronic countermeasures. First Lieutenant Vorak's vessel took a direct hit to its starboard engine. His damage report reached command just before his signal cut out. He described energy beams that burned through armor plating like it was atmospheric lining. Not projectile weapons, not explosive charges, focused particle streams that bypassed shield harmonics through some unknown principle. 3 more dropships reported sudden system failures before impact. Navigation systems went offline. Communications dissolved into static. Weapons control locked out their operators. The humans weren't just shooting, they were hacking. Their electronic warfare capabilities penetrated encryption that should have been unbreakable. Zuraxi technology became their vulnerability. Ground teams that managed to land found themselves facing enemies emerging from terrain that shouldn't exist. Soldiers reported human fighters rising from the ground itself. Concealed hatches opened where scans showed solid bedrock. Tunnel networks that didn't appear on any geological survey. The humans moved through the landscape like ghosts, appearing and disappearing through hidden access points. The clinical operation dissolved into chaotic engagement. Dropship pilots requested emergency evac. Ground commanders asked for updated tactical maps that didn't exist. The Zuraxi had trained for overwhelming force against disorganized resistance. They had no protocols for an enemy that out-technologized them. A wing commander's transmission captured the moment of realization. They're not primitive. They're using gravitic distortion fields. Our projectiles are curving away from targets. Their infantry wear personal inertial dampeners. This isn't a settlement. It's a military research facility. His ship vanished from tracking systems 30 seconds later. The casualty reports began filtering up the chain of command. Vessel after vessel lost. Crew complements wiped out. The Zuraxi were taking losses against opponents they'd considered barely capable of operating firearms. Their confidence shattered with each destroyed ship. Their technological superiority evaporated in the face of systems they couldn't comprehend. Soldiers, on the ground, described human combat teams moving with coordinated precision that matched their own elite units. They used tactics the Zuraxi recognized from their own training manuals: flanking maneuvers, suppressive fire patterns, electronic warfare protocols. The humans weren't just defending. They were demonstrating professional military training. Command channels filled with requests for reinforcement that couldn't be answered. The invasion force designed to pacify a primitive settlement found itself outgunned and outmaneuvered. Their drop zones became killing zones. Their landing patterns became predictable paths into ambushes. The hunters had become the prey. Their advanced technology became obsolete against systems that shouldn't exist. Their military doctrine collapsed against tactics they'd never encountered. Each transmission from the surface carried the same underlying message. The situation was not as intelligence reported. The enemy was not what they appeared. The operation was failing. The Zuraxi command channel lit with an unauthorized transmission that bypassed every security protocol. It didn't request access. It simply appeared on every screen. A human woman's face resolved into focus. Sharp features, calm eyes, no uniform. She identified herself as Mayor Duriakin Cade of New Olympus. Her voice carried the flat precision of a legal scholar, not a frightened civilian. She cited Galactic Charter Section 12, Paragraph 7. Not as a plea. As a statement of fact, she detailed their violations with clinical detachment: targeting civilian infrastructure, use of disproportionate force, failure to issue proper warning before initiating hostilities. Each charge landed with the weight of documented evidence. Her transmission included sensor logs the Zuraxi didn't know existed. She played back their own command discussions. She displayed targeting data from their weapon systems. She showed real-time footage of the bombardment from ground-level sensors they'd supposedly destroyed. The humans had recorded everything. She didn't ask for mercy. She didn't negotiate terms. She informed them that under galactic law, they now had the right to defend themselves by any means necessary. Her tone never rose. Her expression never changed. She spoke as if reading a prepared legal brief to a disciplinary board. The Zuraxi commanders watched in stunned silence. Their secure channels had been compromised. Their operational security had failed completely. The humans hadn't just survived their attack. They documented it for future prosecution. Mayor Duriakin Cade concluded with a simple declaration: "Your actions have voided any protection under interstellar conventions. We will exercise our right to self-defense as outlined in Charter Provisions 12.7 through 1245. The transmission ended as abruptly as it began. On the bridge of the inevitable dominance, officers scrambled to trace the signal source. Their systems found nothing. The transmission had originated from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Their communications officer reported the signal used quantum-entangled particles, technology they considered theoretical. The legal implications settled over the command staff. They hadn't been conducting a police action. They'd committed documented war crimes against a species that understood galactic law better than their own legal advisors. The humans hadn't just prepared militarily. They'd prepared legally. Commanders who minutes earlier had been discussing tactical withdrawals now faced a new reality. This wasn't just a military engagement anymore. It was a legal battle that would extend beyond this star system. The humans had evidence. They had jurisdiction. They had the charter on their side. Junior officers began quietly accessing the Galactic Charter on their terminals. They read Section 12 for the first time. The provisions were clear. The penalties for violations were severe. Entire command chains could be tried before interstellar courts. The political consequences could dismantle their expansionist policies.